This is my no bullshit guide to how to learn vocabulary. And it's guaranteed to get you great results. So grab a refreshing drink, a pen and paper, and let's have a look. Let's start with the two principles that are essential when it comes to learning new words. And I call them meaning and context. Let's start with meaning. Let's start with a question, and it might sound stupid, but what does it mean to learn vocabulary? What does it mean to learn a new word? And I'm going to tell you what it does not mean. It does not mean going into a list and seeing word English, word Japanese, and then just memorizing this. That's not learning a word. But instead, you should look at it like this. If you have a list like this, don't make the mistake of imagining an equal sign in the middle. If we take the example for to play in English and asobu in Japanese, don't put an equal sign. They're not the same thing. Just because on the graph or on the kind of list they are in the same column and someone wrote them together doesn't mean they're the same thing. Because they actually mean different things. To play in English can mean to play soccer, to play the guitar, or to just play with your friends. In Japanese, the word asobu does not mean play the guitar or play soccer. So, the words are different. That's the whole point. And what you're trying to learn when you're learning vocabulary is what the word means in the language you're trying to learn. They are just written next to each other in a list because to play, the English word to play, is the closest thing there is in English to describe asobu. Each word has their own connotation and nuance to it in its own language. And it's your job to really figure out what that word really means in the foreign language. Second important point, context. Same scenario. We have a list. To play and asobu. If you do this with 1,000 words, your retention is gonna be super low because there's no context to that word whatsoever. Meaning, in your brain, the connection between the two words is very weak. So you need to bring some context to the words. I'll explain it in an example. Let's think you're going through something and you find a word and you don't really understand it. So you put it into a dictionary and you're kind of getting the grasp of it. You put it into another dictionary. So now you have two kind of definitions for that one word. And then you put it into YouTube and you find and watch a video of someone explaining the kind of usages of that word in the language. You've now consumed a few minutes of content for just that word alone. Meaning you have a lot of fucking context for just one word. And the chance that you're gonna forget that one word is super low. And of course, you don't need to spend half an hour for every word because that's just inefficient. But context increases retention. So, really important, understand the word you're trying to learn, meaning, and give it some context. Alright, principles out of the way. Let's now look at the good stuff. What is actually the best way to learn new words? And because everyone is in a different kind of learning stage chronologically, I've divided students into two groups. The first group, who's quite fresh to learning Japanese and isn't really in that state where they can be immersing very effectively. And then the second group that are further along, intermediate or advanced, who either are already immersing or are at least capable of immersing. Let's start with group number 1. The basic recommendation is really simple. For someone who isn't quite good enough yet to be immersing effectively, I recommend just following a textbook. I used Genki, but there's others out there and they're completely fine. In the textbook, you kind of have a list of vocabulary. And I said that's not good, but it's not the same thing because the book as a whole kind of gives all of those words a bit of context because you use them in the practice section and read them in text and so forth. If you do want to have other sources of words other than the textbook, like for example immersive sources like graded readers or Today Easy Japanese, which are kind of Japanese texts that are a bit simplified for beginners. Or you have other sources you want to take words from that are low or no context at all. Like for example, just the vocabulary list for the N5 JLPT. That has covered where we can learn new words. So basically the textbook and other stuff you want to experiment in. Now let's have a look at how you learn those words in the given sources. Simple advice for the textbook, I would just go for a pre-made deck. For Genki, there's many pre-made community decks that are amazing. I would take some that have audio and maybe example sentences. And if you do experiment with other sources, like for example the N5 list, then I would really focus on getting the whole meaning behind the word and then searching up some example sentences and putting them into Anki. If you get the words from something immersive, then there's a great add-on called Yomi-chan. I'm sure there's others like it as well, but I use Yomi-chan, which is kind of a pop-up dictionary that allows you to make quick Anki entries from digital text. If you're interested more about sentence mining and Yomi-chan in general, I will be making a video, but in case that is not out yet, just put it into YouTube and there will be many reviews and tutorials on how to get started with that. So big conclusion for Group 1 who's early in their studies, recommendation to just go with your textbook of choice and put the words that you learn in that textbook into Anki. I recommend a pre-made deck with sentences and or audio, and you should be sweet. Let's move on to Group 2. Alright, Group 2 now. And in this group, I'm describing people that are either already immersing or at least capable of immersing. And if you feel like you are in a kind of middle state of both groups, then maybe it helps to know that starting to immerse is always difficult and it feels like you don't understand anything. And that's perfectly fine. But back to the topic. Group 2, in my opinion, should focus mainly on immersing and getting their words through that immersive process. Here the sources are huge. You can read manga, light novels, watch anime, movies, read the newspaper, watch native YouTube content, or even listen to podcasts. I do like to do that when I'm driving or I'm in the train and just have headphones on. Now, for Group 2, there still might be people who are working with textbooks, and that's perfectly fine. And you don't need to skip the vocabulary in those textbooks. For example, if you're in Genki 2 still in the middle at lesson 18 or whatever, definitely still do the vocabulary. That's not a bad idea at all. And in case you are again studying for the JLPT, you can also go for the N3 or N2 or N1 vocabulary lists and get your words from there. Let's now do the same concept and look at how to move the words from those immersive sources to Anki. Because doing this all manually is a lot of work, like watching anime, seeing a word you don't understand, typing it out into Anki, typing the sentence, putting audio or whatever. It's a huge amount of work. And thankfully, there's a lot of tools that help you with that. Now, I won't be going into any technical stuff here because it's just way too huge of a topic, but the keywords here are Yomi-chan and sentence mining. If I don't have a video up yet, Just type it into YouTube and you'll have plenty of results. In case you're getting words from an N3 or N2 or whatever JLPT list, then I would be looking at Anki and getting shared community decks that include sentences and audio. These things are out there and they're really valuable. So in conclusion, if you are capable of immersion, and you are sooner than you think, that's my opinion, then you should take the words you don't understand from your content and put them into Anki with today's community tools that make that process a lot easier. And yes, that's basically it for both groups. It's not hard, it's not complicated, but it really does work. And you'll be surprised how powerful that combination of content, immersion, and Anki really is. Let's now get to the last section and have a look at a few lessons and realizations I've made along the way. Number one is that you should really be thinking about what words you really want to retain and learn. Because of course you can immerse and watch content and just take every word out you don't understand. But chances are some of those words you don't actually need. So have a look at this graphic. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but I'll explain it really quickly. The inner circle is kind of the golden nugget. They're the most common words that get used the most amount of times in normal Japanese content or conversation. So that kind of core depicts the really high yield words. And the further out you go, the more words there actually are, but the fewer the use cases really are. Meaning the ring on the outside represents words that there are a lot of, but you use really rarely. Like super specific financial terms or something like that. And especially when you're not aiming for full fluency, but just aim to get to a simple conversational level, there's nothing wrong with that, then this point is especially important to you because the words on the outer circles kind of will be irrelevant to you. So you shouldn't waste any time learning words that you're never going to use. Now going into even more detail is that this core and the circles actually don't really look the same for everyone. If you're a finance guy, for example, you might use those finance terms a lot more and maybe even need them in a job than someone else. So that core looks different for everyone else. Meaning, and that's a conclusion, you need to understand what words are high yield for you and are worth it to acquire, and the ones that you don't need, just have a look what they mean in your immersion process and then discard them on the way. And to finish up with a story of mine where yet again I fucked up is when I downloaded a N4 Anki deck for all the vocabulary for the JLPT N4, and it was exactly just the thing that I was kind of warning you about. Just a list with Japanese on the front and English on the back and no context whatsoever. I didn't look up the proper meaning of the word and I didn't give it any context, and I probably tried to learn about 500 words of them, and I'm not joking, I probably forgot 450 of those again. So yeah, that experience kind of violated all the rules I've just pointed out and lost me a huge amount of time. But yeah, now you know how to do it, and if you follow this program and you are consistent, you're guaranteed to see results. You are. So let's go. You don't have an excuse anymore.